Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And I am your host, Nora Muhammad. In this episode, I want to talk about American history and as it relates to educational curriculum and instruction in our public schools. There is much debate, and there has been ongoing debate about what is to be taught in our schools and what should be withheld from the curriculum in many of our schools. And we see this a lot happening in what's termed as red states. Red states are states that are predominantly Republican, that have Republican state legislatures and or state governors. And Florida is one such example in which history is under attack, I would say, or the teaching of history is under attack. And often what many of our people who work as activists are pushing for is for what we call African American history or Black American history in our schools. And in Florida, there's a tug of war, if you will, about the AP Advanced Placement African American course. And there was also a short while ago a conversation about AP African American history in some other states in this nation. And the courses or the curriculum have been pushed back, and there's instruction that is to be excluded. And what I think, and this is my perspective, my opinion, what I think what we get wrong, that is Black people who are advocating or who are activists regarding American history and education in the schools. I think what we get wrong is pushing for African American history. I think that when we term it as that African American history, I really find that to be a misnomer. When you're talking about African American history, we're still talking about American history. And my argument is that we should talk about what our people experienced and accomplished in this nation, not as African American history, but it is American history. And so my argument is that if we reframe or exclude or talk about the exclusion of history that references the European enslaving Africans, not as Black history, it's American history. And it's definitely more white American history than Black history. It has not, or it was not in 1855 and in 1655, in 1985. It has never been the right or the authority of Black people to direct what's happened in this nation. We were not governing. White Americans were governing, specifically white American men. But white Americans, they were creating the direction for this nation, and they were in governing power, and they have maintained their governing power. So if we, or if they rather, determined that to fulfill the needs or to fulfill the goals and produce the outcome of this nation, that they, white Americans, would enslave and ship captured Africans to this continent, then that's like saying, or that is as much as the slave's history as it is the donkey or mule's history when we talk about plowing of the fields. The African, now we're called the African American, we were subject to the use, the direction, and the governance of white Americans, white slave masters. We were the object of their desires, or we helped to fulfill their desires. We were not directing. We were not determining. We had no sovereignty. We did not get our viewpoints or opinions honored. Our bodies and our lives were in service to our slave masters. And when we push it as an African American history, when we're talking about slavery, when we're talking about the struggle during Jim Crow and the civil rights movement, we were still people who were at the mercy and the object of scorn of those who indeed ruled the country. And you may argue, Nora, we have had black politicians, we've had black Supreme Court judges, and that may be true. We've had black mayors and black senators, and that may have been true and may still be true. However, we operate in their system, in that political system, definitely in the minority, and definitely with only the authority and power that is given to us. And I go back to, the donkey and the mule, they're not making their own history when, they're being strapped, when the plow was being strapped to them and they're plowing the fields so that the white slave master, the white Caucasian, the white American can pull crops out of the earth, or we can pull crops out of the earth for them. It was not the donkey's history. It was not the mule's history. This is the history of America. And part of American history is what black people did indeed experience. However, I think that we should reframe it in terms of what white Americans designated and designed in this nation. So that is what should be the history lesson. This is the design of the United States of America from 1619 until 1865, and then 1865 until 1965. This was the design. This was the intention of America. And we just find ourselves experiencing America. It is not because the reason I say this, and I've said this before in the podcast, it is because if we say, well, this is Black history, it's as if white people had nothing to do with that experience. And so certainly Black people, Black students may be more interested, Black parents may be more interested in the history experienced by Black people in this nation. However, everybody needs to learn American history. It's not as if Black students are excluded from the part of history class that talks about the conquistadors and the European settlers coming to this nation. Now, that might not have involved us directly. We may not have been a part of that process. We may not have been on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria that brought the European here to this nation before they slaughtered the Native Americans who were here. But we still learn it. We weren't on the ships. We weren't part of the slaughtering and the genocide that happened to the indigenous who were here in this part of the world, but we learn it. It's still something that's part of the American education curriculum. So why would the part of the curriculum that involved what white Americans did to Black African slaves Why would that just be relegated over into that corner, that dusty corner that is African American history or Black history? It's American history. And, the idea that, so that's part one. Part one is that I think we would be more successful if we stop trying to make that part of history our history. That is American history. Now, yes, we were here and our foreparents experienced it, but it is not just African American history. That is indeed American history. Chattel slavery, lynching, whipping, burning, raping, lying, deception. That is American history. And it just so happened that to a large degree, Black people were the unfortunate object of that history. Now, the second part is the idea that there's intention to hide the truth, right? Hiding the truth prevents a real interrogation of the events in this nation. Where we see Florida and other states that are restricting an accurate narration of this nation's history, the idea is to minimize the barbaric, the inhumane, the unjust, the shameful treatment of this nation's slaves. The unjust treatment, the inhumanity, the cruelty of the great and great grandchildren. They don't have to introspect, inspect, or interrogate their great and great grandfathers' histories. They don't have to carry that burden on their minds. Their minds don't have to be encumbered by the reality of the history of what their forefathers did to our great and great grandfathers. Yet our children and the great grandchildren of the slaves, their bodies and their minds are still being impacted by the cruelty and barbaric, inhumane, torturous experience that we had here in this nation. It is it's really outstanding. I mean, it's remarkable to me that in an entire part of this nation's history is being excluded, while we sit and argue this is African American history. No, they are omitting American history for whatever their intentions are, whatever the object, whatever they hope to gain from it. They certainly do not want, and they're making it clear that they don't want their children's minds burdened by the behavior of their foreparents, while our children are being burdened by the systems that created the trauma and the systems that maintain the trauma established by their slave master grandparents and great grandparents. So let's reframe this conversation. That history is American history. As much as the horse and the chicken and the cattle, they're not making their own history. They're making history for their owners. And that was us. And unfortunately, that continues to be us making history here in America as the object, and in many ways still in captivity and ownership by white Americans. And until we recognize and stop trying to make that history special, like it's just ours, and it's not just ours, then we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're doing others a disservice. Let me know what you think about this episode. You may disagree with me. I'd love to hear it and I'd love to talk about it. And, you can send me an email. You can hit me up on social media. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this episode. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property. And to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.